Coming up on New Day at Arirang, the Yoon administration will hold its first cabinet meeting today to discuss the supplementary budget bill aimed at helping virus-hit small business owners before it's presented at the National Assembly on Friday. President Yoon Suk-yeol wrapped up his second day in office, meeting with foreign dignitaries in Seoul for his inauguration ceremony. The president took part in 13 separate inauguration diplomacy meetings, including with Indonesia's former president. U.S. inflation in the month of April reached 8.3% on year, showing signs of leveling off. However, the figure still remains close to a 40-year high.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Thursday, May 12th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Oh Seung.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Thanks for joining us this morning, because over the next hour, we'll give you the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, President Yoon Suk-yeol is set to convene his first cabinet meeting at 3 p.m. on Thursday to approve the second extra budget proposal of the year.
Worth at least $26 billion, the budget is mainly aimed at aiding pandemic-hit small businesses. The meeting will take place at the new presidential office in Yongsan in central Seoul. It remains to be seen, though, whether Yoon will appoint a few more ministers ahead of the meeting, which requires a majority of the 20-member body to be present in order to be convened. Yoon's cabinet is currently only partially filled due to delays confirming ministerial nominees. The budget bill will be presented at the National Assembly on Friday. President Yoon is scheduled to deliver his budget speech at the Parliament next Monday. As Yoon sets out to improve Seoul's frosty relations with Japan, he has held a second meeting from the Japanese delegation to his inauguration ceremony. Members of the South Korean Parliament joined the president, who shared his vision to mend bilateral ties. Kim Do-yeon brings us the highlights from that session.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has again showed his determination to repair South Korea's badly damaged relationship with its neighbor Japan, meeting on Wednesday for a second time with Japanese officials who attended his inauguration.
한일 양국은 가장 가까운 이웃이자 자유민주적 가치와 시장 경제를 공유하는 중요한 협력 파트너입니다. 정체된 한일 관계를 조속히 복원하고 개선하는 것이 양국의 공동 이익에 부합합니다.
Yoon's first meeting with a Japanese official the day before was with Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi, with whom he affirmed a shared goal of improving bilateral ties. This meeting, though, was with members of Korea-Japan Parliamentarians Union, led by Fukushiro Nukaga of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party.
In yesterday's speech, you noted the crisis of liberal democracy, and I think the audience must have been deeply moved by your statement that Korea will actively fulfill its international responsibilities based on universal values.
Nukaga added that he met with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida before he came to Seoul, and that the Prime Minister also said he wants to improve relations. Yoon's approach to Tokyo has been a hot topic of late because the bilateral relationship has been at its worst point in decades over sensitive historical issues. And with the change of government, Yoon has said it needs to improve for both countries' sake. He and Nukaga also agreed to start with expanding people-to-people exchanges. One idea was restoring visa-free travel, along with direct flights between Gimpo and Haneda airports, which have been suspended since March 2020. Yoon's meeting with Nukaga was just one of many he had on Wednesday to thank guests who attended his inauguration representing their countries. Others he met with included dignitaries from Indonesia, Canada, Saudi Arabia, and the President of the Central African Republic. He met the day before with the delegates from the United States and China. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Seoul's new finance chief took office Wednesday. In his inaugural address, Choo Kyung-ho emphasized the need to curb inflation and cut red tape to foster growth led by the private sector. Ji-young shares with us his remarks.
The Yoon administration's economic team is now in place, led by the new finance minister, Choo Kyung-ho. Choo was officially inaugurated on Wednesday as Minister of Economy and Finance, a role where he'll double as Deputy Prime Minister. As a former Vice Finance Minister and Head of Financial Policy at the Financial Services Commission, Choo played a key role in designing Yoon's major economic policies. In his inaugural address, he shared his views of the economic challenges Korea faces, both at home and abroad. He emphasized the need to stabilize prices and people's livelihoods as the top priority, saying the government should come up with policies to provide relief to those hit by the pandemic. To do this, Choo said, the government will immediately form an emergency economic task force to closely monitor and counteract economic challenges. Choo also said the cycle of low economic growth should be broken by a revitalization led by the private sector. And he called for drastic reforms of regulations to help companies create more quality jobs. Stronger policies are needed also, he said, to address other economic issues including Korea's low birth rate, aging society, and regional imbalances, and to protect the socially vulnerable. 엄지영, Arirang News.
There are growing concerns North Korea is preparing to conduct a nuclear test in the next few weeks. Of course, Seoul's new defense minister vowed to respond sternly to the regime's provocations. Ji tells us more.
South Korea's new defense minister Lee Jong-seop took office Wednesday and said the country will sternly respond to North Korea's provocations. During his inauguration speech at the nation's defense ministry in Seoul, he said as Pyongyang continues to advance its nuclear and weapon capabilities, it poses a serious threat to the Korean peninsula and regional security.
If North Korea goes ahead with a tactical provocation, we will respond sternly based on our right to self-defense. Also, we will counter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats by strengthening the ThreeAxis defense system.
The ThreeAxis system refers to the South Korean military's response to North Korea's missile attacks. It consists of 3 programs. 1. Preemptively striking North Korea's nuclear and missile sites. 2. Intercepting the North's missiles. And 3. Mass retaliation against North Korea following an attack on the South. He also vowed to strengthen the military alliance with the U.S. and said he'll expand cooperation with allies in the defense field. This comes as the U.S. State Department's principal deputy spokesperson said last week that Washington assesses that Pyongyang is preparing to conduct a nuclear test as early as this month. If the North does conduct a nuclear test, it'd be the regime's 7th such test and the first one in nearly 5 years. Meanwhile, a top U.S. intelligence official has also warned that North Korea continues to produce fissile materials, including plutonium and uranium, for nuclear weapons. In a global threat assessment report submitted to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee before a budget hearing, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines explained that Kim Jong-un remains strongly committed to expanding the regime's nuclear weapons arsenal and continuing ballistic missile research and development. Ji, Arirang News.
Now, candidate registration starts Thursday for the June 1st local elections and parliamentary by-elections here in South Korea. Now, the National Election Commission says candidates are required to register by May 13th, and the official campaign period begins on May 19th. Now, there are 7 districts up for grabs, including Daegu, Seongnam, Changwon, and Jeju. Now, they're vacant as incumbent lawmakers step down to run in the gubernatorial and mayoral elections. Now, local authorities review declaring COVID-19 as endemic and move closer to a return to normal life. Now, this would mean further easing of virus measures, including the removal of mandatory quarantine for confirmed patients. Kim Ji-yeon brings us the updates.
South Korea reported 43,925 daily new coronavirus cases on Wednesday. The second straight day it stayed above the 40,000 level. Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said there were 383 critically ill patients, down 15 from a day earlier. 29 COVID-related deaths were recorded, marking a 0.13% fatality rate. South Korea's daily new infections have been on the downward trend since mid-March after a peak of over 620,000. So the new Yoon Suk-yeol government is trying to push forward toward a return to pre-pandemic normalcy. South Korea eased the country's outdoor mask mandate last Monday and downgraded the virus to a Class 2 infection from Class 1 on March 25th. The Ministry of Health and Welfare said Wednesday it'll discuss next week whether it'll proceed with the government's plans to officially declare the number of coronavirus cases as having plateaued or is in steady decline on May 23rd, indicating COVID-19 has become endemic in the country. One of the conditions is recording fewer than 100,000 daily infections, which would allow the medical system to readily provide treatment for confirmed patients.
During the transition, there will be a complete reorganization of neighborhood hospitals and clinics to enable in-person treatment. The current system is convoluted and ineffective, divided into facilities that provide checkups and those that offer treatment.
During the next 100 days, the ministry will unveil plans to carry out some of the coronavirus response measures released by the President Yoon's transition committee last month to prepare for a post-pandemic regime. This includes revamping coronavirus response measures based on scientific evidence, establishing sustainable infectious disease response measures, the protection of vulnerable groups of people in the low-income bracket, and the procurement of safe vaccines and coronavirus treatments. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
It's time for Onpoint, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. And the world is seeing a rise in virus cases due to the new Omicron variant surfacing.
That's right, and also with a warning of another massive resurgence in the fall and winter. Will we be ready? Well, to find out, we connect with Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at University of Hong Kong, joining us this morning. Good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning.
All right, so first things first, I guess with these new Omicron subvariants, we understand some countries are actually seeing spikes in daily infection numbers right now. Which countries particularly are seeing, I guess, increases in daily infections, and also how concerning is it?
Well, BA4 and BA5 have been reported in parts of Europe. South Africa has seen a lot of cases of BA4 particularly. The US is seeing another subvariant. But one of our concerns is that we don't have eyes everywhere in the world. There may be other parts of the world that are having epidemics with these subvariants that is not recognized yet because of the lack of surveillance data and particularly virus sequence data.
And Professor, I know you've talked about having to develop vaccines that really adapt to new variants. And well, what's the progress like at this point? Are we going to see any new vaccines anytime soon?
I think the companies have tested Omicron-specific vaccines, but the news has gone quiet on those, and it seems like maybe we're not going to get a chance to have those. Maybe we have to wait for the next variant in the future before we can have updated vaccines. I think it's not ideal. It would be better if we can have vaccines that keep up with the circulating virus. We're now using a vaccine with the strain that's 2 years old.
So another thing that we heard just not too long ago is the White House saying that the U.S. could potentially see about 100 million infections in the fall and winter. How likely is this, and how will this impact the world's push to kind of transition into the endemic phase?
I think the big question we're all asking is, what would the severity of those infections be like? If it's 100 million coughs and colds, that's actually nothing unusual. That's been happening for many, many years. We all get coughs and colds every winter. The question is, how many of those potential COVID infections would need to be hospitalized, would lead to severe disease, even fatality, even death? We don't know. And that's really the question that we're all thinking about. Hopefully, with the high vaccine coverage, with the high levels of immunity from natural infections, we won't need to worry about COVID so much in the future as we have in the past, but it's not going to go away completely. It's still going to pose a threat.
And Professor, I suppose the next big question is whether we can actually turn this pandemic into an endemic, given the subvariants and the variants that keep emerging. So what's your stance on this?
Well, certainly the virus is not going away. I don't know whether it will be always present in somewhere like Korea, or whether it will come and go. We'll have epidemics like we have with flu. So sometimes of the year there'll be a lot around, other times there won't be any. I think that is the most likely trajectory for COVID. And as new variants and subvariants emerge, they will spread around the world, causing epidemics, hopefully mainly mild infections, hopefully not too many severe cases. And that would mirror the pattern we have with influenza now.
Yeah, I mean, the long-term consensus is that, it's long from over right now, but just kind of judging by, I guess, I want to get your take on which countries had the best quarantine measures in place, because at the same time, it seems like those are some of the measures that we could take in for potential resurgences to come in the future. So which countries would you say did the best when it comes to the quarantine measures?
Oh, and every country has different capacity to do things. China did very well in the first 2 years of the pandemic, minimizing the numbers of infections and severe cases. But I don't think many other countries could replicate the system and the infrastructure set up in China. I think Singapore has done pretty well in managing cases. And one part of that, a key part of that, is knowing the situation in the community, having awareness of the levels of activity of COVID and being able to respond in response to the case numbers. So knowing what's the level of incidence and then responding to that. And I think that's going to be the way going forward. So surveillance is going to be essential.
Well, it looks like we'll have to keep on adapting then. Professor Well, thank you so much for your insights today. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to wrap up part one of A New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around for part two. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, the global economy is expected to improve slightly this year.
Have all dropped, but
future economic indicators weren't so positive.
Faster growth in emerging
U.S.-China trade deal may be near, while a rally in global
For an economic outlook of South Korea's economy for 2020, we get a preview now from our business correspondent.
Arirang, what matters?
What made this all possible? LiDAR technology is being used to improve accuracy.
It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, freedom was the keyword of President Yoon Suk-yeol's inauguration speech, mentioned 35 times throughout his address on Tuesday. Protecting freedom set the tone for how Yoon's administration would tackle the slew of issues that South Korea faces, from social and income disparities, economic growth and innovation, to dealing with North Korea, as well as Seoul's place in global governance. So can you make South Korea a beacon of freedom and liberal democracy in the world over the next 5 years, as he envisions? To answer this question, today we invite Professor Shin Gi-wook, Director of the Walter H. Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center at Stanford University. Very warm welcome to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
So good morning, and thanks for having me in this program.
Thank you so much. And well, my first question to you, Professor. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol, he began his term with a very polarized public opinion towards his presidency. I mean, there have been concerns that Yoon, with his rather elitist background and key appointments as well, is going to be out of touch with the South Korean public. So, in your opinion, what must he do to prove that he is up to the job?
Okay, so before addressing that question, let me congratulate Mr. Yoon to be Korean president, and my best wishes for him and his administration. You're right that he grew up in middle-class family, and he attended really top elite program in Korea, which is law school in Seoul National University. And then, he was a career prosecutor, very powerful position in Korean society. And if you look at his key appointments so far, they are very able, experienced people. Also, Yoon Suk-yeol has been promoting or speaking about meritocracy. So I think these are, on the one hand, very good developments. At the same time, as you point out, that some people are a little concerned that there's a lack of diversity, and also, he may be, out of touch from the public. And certainly, he has to remember that he's not anymore a bureaucrat or prosecutor, but he's a politician who has to deal with a diverse group of people. So certainly, I think your concerns are quite, valid, but still, I like to give him benefit of doubt, and I think especially his personality might actually help him to interact more actively and friendly with the people. So I think compared to, let's say, President Park Geun-hye or Moon Jae-in, who are, I guess, a little bit shy in personality, but looks like Mr. Yoon is more outgoing, in a person. And I think this may be, Konglish, but then, Korean people saying about skinship. So sounds like, looks like he is quite, doing pretty well, having skinship with, Korean people. So despite those concerns, once again, I'd like to give him some benefit of doubt in the first couple of years.
Right, and the new president did emphasize how he'd be approaching his presidency with openness and more human interactions, as you mentioned, Professor. And well, more on what he said during his speech. Actually, Professor, before we go to say, you have a book coming out next month, and that's called South Korea's Democracy in Crisis, which highlights the threat of illiberalism, populism, and polarization in recent years, not just in South Korea, but around the world, of course. But what was notable about President Yoon Suk-yeol's speech was that he emphasized the importance of liberal democracy, as opposed to the Moon administration, which sort of omitted using the word liberal. So what do you make of this change?
Frankly speaking, I don't think his speech was the most moving speech. Okay, but still, I think he hit the right point in his speech, especially his emphasis on freedom, because I think now we are at a very critical juncture in terms of preserving and protecting a liberal democracy at home and abroad. As you mentioned in my book, I've been talking about threats of illiberalism as well as populism and polarization. I've been speaking out about erosion of liberal democracy in South Korea for last few years. And despite high expectation for upgrading the democracy, I don't think liberal democracy has thrived under Moon Jae-in government. So certainly we have to enhance or promote liberal democracy at home. At the same time, liberal democracy is under threat globally, especially after Russian invasion of Ukraine. There are growing concern about threatening liberal democracy in the world. So I think, my colleague and also myself including, we are really quite concerned about growing tension between liberal democracy and autocracy. Okay, autocracy represented by Russia, China, and a few other countries. So therefore, Korea is really at a very important position to preserve and protect liberal democracy at home and also abroad. So in this regard, I believe Yoon Suk-yeol's speech was on the right spot, and I fully agree with what he was saying in his speech.
Right, and of course Yoon also stressed the importance of overcoming social division and polarization with what he said was the universal value of freedom. And also, well, over the past few years, achieving fairness in society, it's been one of the major changes that all South Koreans wanted to see. But many had their hopes dashed over the past 5 years as Moon's own party members, former President Moon Jae-in's own party members were caught up in Me Too scandals, a slew of nepotism scandals as well. So how critical is it going to be for new President Yoon Suk-yeol to address social justice and corruption, and how should he go about doing so?
Well, I think this is very important, a very difficult issue to tackle. When Korean economy was growing and there was a good social mobility, this was much less an issue. But now it's becoming more and more important. And 5 years ago, when then President Moon Jae-in gave his speech, he highlighted that he wanted to create a country that has equal opportunity and fair process and just outcome. I thought it's a very moving, excellent speech. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened over the last 5 years. As you mentioned, the fairness has become a more serious issue. So I think for new government, how to address this fairness, it's a very, very important issue, but tough issue. And we know that during election campaign, PPP, People's Power Party, they're sort of promoting gender politics. But then it didn't really work out. So I don't think identity politics is a solution to this question about fairness. So I think how to ensure fair process and also creating opportunity for social mobility is very, very important. So in my view, Korea has become more class society. I think Korean elite has to be aware of this issue and trying to take more responsibility for the fairness in Korean society. Now I think about social justice and corruption. I mean, that's also a very important issue because certainly if you did anything wrong, then you have to be punished. But I really hope that the new government doesn't fall into temptation to launch another campaign to eradicate what they call deep-rooted evils, which happened under Moon Jae-in government. So once again, fairness, social justice, and corruption, these are very, very important issues. I hope that there will be some progress on those issues under the new government.
So we really need the rule of law to be effectively seen to. And well, there's concern actually that Yoon's traditionally pro-business party might overlook some important social welfare policies. Do you think they're going to pay enough attention to improving people's livelihoods? And what do you think are the key areas that they really need to prioritize amidst this worsening income polarization and rather dismal future prospects, especially for young people in South Korea?
I don't think his government, or for that matter, any government, can any longer overlook this welfare issue. I heard that now the new government is now proposing a supplementary bill, right, supporting about 5,000 plus to small to medium business. And certainly, still, Korea is not really out of the pandemic. And we know that Korea was fairly successful in containing virus, but at the sacrifice of small to medium business. So I think how to support, those SME is very, very important. And certainly, I expect the Yoon government maybe to get rid of some policies that were seen as socialist under Moon Jae-in government, and certainly more focus on market mechanism. For example, like in housing policy, maybe giving more supply and so on. But at the same time, I don't think they can ignore social welfare. They have to have a balance between growth and distribution or also social welfare.
And Professor, President Yoon's move to relocate the presidential office to Yongsan-gu district in Seoul, which he has done, of course, it's generated a fair amount of criticism. The decision, of course, it's already been made, it's already happened, but what do you think he needs to do in order to make the move worth, just a load of money really worth this massive relocation? What would you like to see him do, really, to make the presidential office more transparent?
I think moving out of Blue House is nothing new. We know that previous candidate or president they were trying to get out of Blue House, but couldn't do that. For many reasons, a lot of practical reasons. And certainly, you might question about the way he handled this move. Why not consulting more people, why you are rushing. But I think in terms of the idea of moving out of Blue House, once again, there's fairly strong argument for that. So, despite those controversy and some concerns, I still believe that he did the right thing. Certainly that there will be some issues in the process. But eventually, after end of the day, I believe he made the right decision. Okay, so I think here one thing I like to highlight is that it's not so much about transparency, but then the way he will govern the country, because he was a career prosecutor, right? And he entered politics only last summer. And I think he improved a lot, over, within less than a year. But still, he has to show his political leadership, especially, dealing with opposition who controlled National Assembly. Also, he has to deal with a lot of civil society, NGO groups, and labor unions. So whether he has patience or values to respect democratic process, because it's not traditional or conventional political leader who would value negotiations and compromise. And then he made fame by fighting against abuse of power and corruption. But he's not going to fight against power anymore. He's in power. So how to use power to govern the country, I think that will be very important and big challenge for him.
And Professor, soon you're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the career program at Stanford. So first of all, yes, congratulations. And on that note, what should be South Korea's role in the world going forward? Something that President Yoon has very much emphasized even before his presidency. Do you think South Koreans are ready to be more global and play a more positive role in the world to spread democratic values?
Right. So, despite all those problems and issues at home, Korea has really become a leading country in the world. Okay. So, maybe top 10 in economic power. Now, Kpop, has a lot of, attention in the world. But I don't think Korea has been playing its role in the global stage, comparable with his economic, its economic, military or cultural power. So I mentioned about the threat to liberal international order earlier. Now I think Korea has to be more proactive in protecting and preserving international order in collaboration with allies like United States and Japan, European nation, and so on. So, I mean, in the past, I've been sort of promoting what I call dolphin, diplomacy. So we may not be big country like US and or China, but still we can play. Korea can play a much more proactive role in the world. Now it's time to do so for South Korea. I really hope that the new government can take up the task.
Well, I'm afraid due to time, this is where we must leave the interview, Professor. But we do look forward to the release of your book, South Korea's Democracy in Crisis, coming out next month, right? And well, hopefully there'll be a more optimistic title maybe after 5 years with your next book after the Yoon administration. But thank you so much, Professor Shin Gyuk at Stanford University. It was a true privilege speaking with you.
Okay, thank you.
The U.S. inflation took a breather last month for the first time in about 8 months. While the increase was slower than in previous months, prices still jumped and remain close to record 40-year highs. Kim Yo-san has more.
U.S. consumer prices rose at an annual pace of 8.3% in April, higher than economists expected. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, a broad-based measure of prices for goods and services, moderated for the first time in 8 months. The rate cooled slightly compared to its peak of 8.5% seen in March. But it was still slightly higher than an 8.1% rise forecast by economists. It was also close to being at the highest level since the summer of 1982. Removing volatile food and energy prices, the so-called core CPI still rose 6.2%. To fight inflation, which has been the single biggest threat to post-pandemic recovery, the Federal Reserve has already pushed forward with 2 interest rate hikes and have pledged more until inflation comes down to the bank's 2% goal. The inflation reading is important given that this data largely determines the Federal Reserve's direction on raising interest rates. Against its backdrop, U.S. stocks retreated Wednesday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average recording a drop for 5 consecutive days. Led by a sell-off in tech, the Nasdaq Composite ended the day down 3.2%, while the S&P 500 shed 1.6%. The benchmark 10-year Treasury note yield dropped from more than a 3-year high to below 3%. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
Now, the U.S. Senate failed to advance a Democratic-led bill Wednesday to protect abortion access nationwide. Now, this comes as all 50 Republicans and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin joined the debating against advancing the bill, leaving Democrats far short of the 60 vote needed to beat the filibuster. Now, the vote was triggered by a leaked draft opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court, indicating that it may be poised to overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling, which protects abortion rights. Now, the vote was largely seen by Democratic leaders as an opportunity to expand their base ahead of November's midterms amid declining approval ratings for President Joe Biden over inflation concerns.
Top US intel officials fear that Russia may use nuclear weapons against Ukraine if the conflict poses an existential threat. Moscow is yet to issue a response to Washington's remarks. Shin Yeon with the latest.
The war in Ukraine is now in its 11th week. Many believe it'll go on even longer now that Russia has shifted most of its focus to eastern Ukraine. Specifically the Donbas region, which includes 2 Russian-backed separatist republics in Luhansk and Donetsk. A top intelligence official in the U.S. predicts that Russia may go beyond capturing the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine.
That President Putin would probably only authorize the use of nuclear weapons if he perceived an existential threat to the Russian state or regime, but we will remain vigilant in monitoring every aspect of Russia's strategic nuclear forces.
Russia hasn't issued an official response, but on Monday, on its biggest patriotic holiday, Victory Day, solidified its stance that the war is to continue. Meanwhile, the U.S. House has passed a $40 billion bill to make it easier for Washington to provide humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. President Joe Biden had urged the Congress to quickly approve this new bill, as the world is paying close attention to whether the West will be able to expand its military alliance against Russia. Finland and Sweden are to decide this week whether to become NATO members. As the war rages on, the bodies of 44 civilians have been found in the rubble of a collapsed building in the city of Izium, which had been seized by Russia in early April. But Ukraine says it is stopping any further advances from Russian forces. Ukrainian troops also reportedly recaptured the settlements north and northeast of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. 신예은, Arirang News.
K-pop star Alexa made history by becoming the first winner of the NBC's American Song Contest. The event is comparable to Eurovision, where the contestants perform their original works. Chung Eun-ju gets us better acquainted with the K-pop star.
K-pop singer Alexa has won the very first American Song Contest, a spin-off of Eurovision. Alexa beat 9 other artists, including Grammy winner Michael Bolton. This is the first time a K-pop artist has won a large-scale audition show held in the United States. NBC's American Song Contest is a music competition that premiered in March this year and wrapped up its 8-week run on Monday, May 9th. Hosted by Snoop Dogg and Kelly Clarkson, 56 artists from U.S. states and territories competed against each other to win the title of Best Original Song. The voting process was similar to that of the Eurovision Song Contest, which combines professional jury points with public points to decide the winner. Alexa represented her home state, Oklahoma, and triumphed by receiving the highest score of 710 points with her song Wonderland, a song she had performed in South Korea only on Arirang TV's Simply K-pop show. Alexa scored especially high in the public vote category and said it felt like her brain had exploded when she heard the results. Alexa, whose full name is Alexandra Christine Schneiderman, is a K-pop singer based in South Korea. Her music career began in 2016 when appearing on the online audition show Rising Legends and rose to fame in 2018 as a contestant of Mnet's Produce 48. Her first single, Bomb, was released in 2019. Alexa had said on multiple occasions that she wanted to show people in the US what makes K-pop. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning to you, Matthew. Now, let's start things off in the occupied West Bank. The United Nations swift to condemn the killing of a journalist in that very region.
Indeed, and during a raid conducted by the Israeli military on Wednesday, an Al Jazeera reporter was shot dead in the city of Jenin. According to reports, 51-year-old Shireen Abu Akleh was wearing a press vest clearly marking her as a journalist, but was shot anyway. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, called her death horrifying and stressed the need for a clear investigation. That sentiment was echoed by the White House. Now, Abu Akleh was reporting on the ongoing slew of arrests by the Israeli military in a bid to stop deadly Arab attacks in Israel. The killing of the reporter has inflamed tensions in the conflict, with Palestinians and a local news channel accusing Israel of killing her. However, Israel's leader claims she was likely hit by indiscriminate shooting from Palestinians. The Polish embassy in Moscow had cleaners remove red paint from its walls on Wednesday, following a suspected retaliatory action for an incident that happened in Warsaw 2 days prior. The perpetrator behind the latest incident has yet to be apprehended. On Monday, the Russian ambassador to Poland was doused in red paint as he visited the Soviet military cemetery in Warsaw. That incident sparked a furious reaction from Moscow, which demanded a formal apology and summoned Poland's ambassador to Russia to lodge a protest. However, Poland's foreign minister said the Russian envoy had been warned by Polish authorities that visiting the cemetery risked provoking an angry reaction, but he went along regardless. Thousands of angry young voters gathered in front of the Philippines Elections Commission building on Tuesday to protest the recent election that saw Ferdinand Marcos Jr. elected as the country's next president. The son of a former dictator, his victory was marred by thousands of reports of election-related anomalies since Monday's vote. Malfunctioning voting machines were one of the biggest complaints, with an election watchdog saying the issue had severely impaired the electoral process. Despite this, Marcos garnered around 31 million votes according to preliminary tallies, more than twice as many as his closest rival. Officials say the margin was so large it could not have been swayed by fraud. After more than 20 years, Apple is discontinuing its iconic iPod. The device was once the face of portable music and a driving force behind one of the world's biggest companies. According to Apple on Tuesday, the only version of the device still on sale, the iPod Touch, will remain on shelves until supplies run out. Since its launch in 2001, the iPod took on a storm of competing music players before being eclipsed by smartphones, music streaming, and the rise of the iPhone. Since its launch, the iPod has undergone a series of transformations, including the introduction of a scroll wheel, increased capacity to 1,000 songs, and a 10-hour-long battery life. A passenger with no flight experience successfully landed a small Cessna 208 plane after the aircraft's pilot lost consciousness on a return flight from the Bahamas. According to an air traffic control recording, the incident occurred on Tuesday morning local time when one of the plane's two passengers called Florida's Fort Pierce Air Traffic Control to brief them on the situation. Thankfully, a 20-year veteran in air traffic control, Robert Morgan, was on hand to help guide the 9-seater plane to the ground. Using his skills as a flight instructor, Morgan gave step-by-step instructions to secure a safe landing.
Good morning. Western parts of the country will have some early summer heat, perhaps record-setting mid-May heat in the capital area, with an expected high of 28 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Then the East Coast will see relatively breezy conditions with easterly winds, with the mercury topping out in the upper teens. Well, we have lots of cloud coverage for most regions except for Seoul today, which will get plenty of sunshine. East Gyeongsangdo province and Jeju, however, could see some light rain, while parts of the Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsang-namdo provinces will see passing rain in the late afternoon. Morning temperatures are a couple of degrees lower in the central regions, but southern provinces are having lows that are 2 to 4 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Then highs in Daejeon and Chuncheon will be heating up to 27 degrees, Daegu at 24 degrees this afternoon. It's going to be rather cloudy on Friday with some passing rain on Jeju and in the east, but pleasant weather returns this weekend under cooler temperatures. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up our newscast for this morning, but we will be back tomorrow for our Friday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
That's right, and thanks as always for tuning in, but do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.